My name is Alyssa Thompson. The private dining room at the country club was filled with the low hum of family conversation and the clink of silverware on plates. We were there to celebrate my father Lawrence's birthday, everyone gathered around the long table with smiles and raised glasses. My 15-year-old son Brandon sat next to me eating quietly. He had been living with his grandparents for the past 3 years, ever since the divorce forced me to relocate for work. He glanced at me quickly when Lawrence casually mentioned how living costs keep going up these days, the kind of offhand comment Brandon had heard more than once. Then my father's voice cut through the room louder than before. "Brandon, you're 15 now. If you want to finish the rest of this meal, you should pay your own share. We can't keep supporting you forever." The table fell silent. Brandon froze fork halfway to his mouth, face draining of color. His hand shook slightly, the unmistakable tremor of a teenager suddenly humiliated in front of family. I set my fork down, and I replied, "Then everyone should take a look at these payments." My father stopped cold, as if someone had switched him off mid-sentence. My mother muttered almost to herself, "What payments?" I smiled faintly and opened my phone, turning the screen toward them. This was only the beginning. If you've ever seen a family dinner turn tense over unfair demands and hidden money issues, drop a comment with your thoughts below and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. My father laughed, but the sound was thin and forced. "Alyssa, don't make this into something bigger than it is." My mother's eyes flicked nervously from him to me, her hands twisting the edge of her napkin in her lap. She said nothing, but the worry was plain on her face. I turned to Brandon. "You've been living with Grandpa and Grandma for 3 years now," I said gently. "After the divorce, I took the new position in the next city. The drive every day would have been impossible, and I refused to pull you out of your school in the middle of 8th grade. You needed consistency, same teachers, same friends, same sports team. Staying here during the week made the most sense." Brandon's voice came out small and shaken. "Mom, what is this about?" I exhaled slowly. The secret I had carried for 6 years pressed against my ribs, demanding to be let out. "6 years ago, I started when you were 9. Your grandfather refinanced the house. They wanted the kitchen redone, new cabinets, granite counters, stainless appliances, and they also booked that 2-week trip through Europe. The loan looked manageable on paper. Then Dad's consulting contract started disappearing. One major client after another backed out. The payments suddenly became impossible to cover with their income alone." I remembered the phone call that arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. My father's voice had trembled over the line. "We're going to lose the house, Alyssa. The foreclosure notice came today. We don't know how to stop it." In the background, my mother had been crying softly, begging me not to let it happen to them. "They reached out to me," I continued. "They said it would only be for a few months, just until Dad secured new business." "Don't make a big deal out of it," he told me. "We'll get back on our feet soon and pay you back." I believed them, so I began sending the mortgage payments every month. Brandon stared at me, disbelief stretching across his face. "You've been paying for their house?" "Yes, every single month. And I never told you. You were still a child back then. I didn't want you worrying about adult problems or feeling like you were part of the reason things got complicated after the divorce. I wanted you to have one less thing to carry." I looked at my parents. I also never put anything in writing. No formal loan agreement, no interest terms, no repayment schedule. I didn't because I loved you both. Because I thought family helps family without turning it into a business deal. Because Dad promised it was only temporary, and I trusted that promise completely. For 6 long years, I had swallowed every doubt that surfaced. I paid quietly while they shared photos of European cafes and new furniture deliveries. I told myself it was worth it to preserve the peace, to avoid painful arguments, to protect Brandon from discovering that the adults he looked up to were relying on me to keep the roof over everyone's heads. I chose silence so the family could remain whole. I chose silence so Brandon could grow up without the shadow of financial strain hanging over him. I chose silence because I believed one day they would catch up. One day they would acknowledge what I had done. One day the help would no longer be needed. But tonight, when my father decided that my teenage son should pay his share at a birthday dinner, that silence finally became impossible to maintain. I had kept the truth hidden for his sake, for their sake, for the sake of what family was supposed to mean. I had absorbed the cost, financial and emotional, so no one else had to. Yet here we were, the weight of 6 years of quiet sacrifice laid bare on the table between us. I swiped to the transaction history on my phone screen, letting the dates and amounts fill the quiet that had fallen over the table. The very first entry was unmistakable: $7,200 transferred in one lump sum to cover the 3 months of back payments that had piled up immediately after the refinance issues began. That was the emergency bailout. After that, the pattern became clear and consistent: $2,400 deposited every month on the same day, without interruption for the full 6 years that followed. I scrolled down slowly, giving everyone time to absorb the rhythm of it. The same amount. The same destination account. My name listed as the sender each time. And that was only the mortgage, I said, keeping my tone even. Property taxes were billed twice a year, several thousand each cycle. Homeowners insurance renewed every 12 months with increasing premiums. Then there was the roof repair last summer, after the storm tore through half the shingles. That invoice alone came to nearly $15,000. I paid it all. Lawrence's face turned a deep crimson. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then forced the words out. "This is private business, Alyssa. You shouldn't be airing this here." My mother's hands shook visibly on the tablecloth. Her eyes were already filling the rims, turning red as tears threatened to spill. She looked at the screen like it was something she had hoped never to see again. I continued without pause, adding everything together: the mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs. The total comes to $157,600. That's what has been sent over the years. Every transfer recorded, every receipt kept. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. The soft classical music playing in the background felt suddenly out of place, distant and irrelevant. I wasn't angry about the dollars themselves. I had earned enough to cover it without hardship. What cut deepest was the realization that for all those years, while I quietly prevented the bank from taking their home, they had treated my son like a parasite. Every time Brandon reached for a second helping at dinner, every time he asked for help with school supplies, every time he simply existed in their space, they had sighed or muttered about responsibility and earning your keep. They had made him feel like the one taking advantage, like the freeloader in the house, when in reality, the house itself was standing because of me. Not a single thank you. Not a single acknowledgement. They had taken the help as if it were their birthright, as if the stability I provided was invisible, automatic owed. And now, at a family birthday celebration, they had the nerve to demand that a 15-year-old boy pay for his plate, as though he were the burden, not the beneficiary of years of silent support. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the flush spreading down his neck. He stared at the glowing figures on the screen, unable to meet my eyes. My mother's breathing had grown shallow. A single tear escaped and traced a slow path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away this time. I let the numbers remain on display. I let the silence stretch thick and unforgiving. No one spoke. No one moved to break it. The weight of 6 years of unacknowledged sacrifice settled over the table like a physical thing, pressing down on everyone present. Brandon sat beside me, his face pale, his eyes locked on the screen. He hadn't spoken since the initial shock, but I could see the storm behind his expression, the confusion giving way to understanding, the hurt deepening into something sharper. I didn't hurry to speak again. I let the truth hang there exposed and undeniable so they could all feel its full measure. Brandon's voice was barely above a whisper. How much was it in total, Mom? I met his eyes directly. $157,600, I answered without hesitation. The number seemed to hit him physically. He blinked once, twice, then slowly turned his gaze back to the phone still resting on the table as if seeing it for the first time. I opened the photo gallery and pulled up a series of screenshots I had quietly collected over the years. Nothing sensational, just ordinary posts that had appeared on their social media feeds at various points. Look here, I said, holding the phone so he could see clearly. While I was covering the payments, your grandparents were sharing pictures from their Alaska cruise standing on the deck with glaciers in the background, posing next to icebergs, the full vacation package. The next spring, they bought a new SUV. I remember the day they drove it up the driveway and posted about the upgrade. And the living room remodel, new leather sectional, massive flat-screen custom curtains, and lighting, all of it photographed and shared online for everyone to like and comment. Brandon stared at the images. His breathing grew uneven, shallow. Each photo seemed to pull a memory forward, one he had pushed aside until now. He remembered. The way my father would lean back in his chair after dinner and say things like, "Money doesn't grow on trees, you know," or "can't just spend without thinking about where it comes from." The casual jabs that always felt aimed at him even when they weren't directed at anyone specific. The way my mother would sigh when Brandon asked for something small, a new backpack for school, a ride to practice, and murmur, "This house isn't a free hotel, young man," or, "We don't raise kids who expect everything handed to them." Every time he had swept the porch without being asked. Every weekend he spent mowing the lawn in the summer heat. Every time he carried heavy bags up the stairs for my mother because her knees ached. Every evening he sat beside my father, patiently walking him through the same computer problems week after week, resetting the router, updating software, explaining things again without frustration. He had done it all willingly, thinking it was his contribution, thinking it showed appreciation for the place he had been allowed to stay, thinking it balanced the scales in some small way. Now those memories were being rewritten in real time. Every chore, every favor, every quiet act of help had been absorbed into their daily comfort while they ignored the true source of it all. It had never been seen as generosity. It had been treated as expectation, as if the house, the stability, the lifestyle, were simply theirs by right, and Brandon's efforts were merely the minimum required to justify his presence. The betrayal settled in his chest like a cold weight. He had been used. Not maliciously perhaps, but used nonetheless. His labor, his time, his obedience had been convenient camouflage for the fact that the entire foundation of their life was being propped up by someone else. Someone they never thanked, someone they now expected their grandson to pay tribute to. His hands clenched on the table. His voice, when it came, trembled with a mix of hurt and dawning anger. So when Grandpa said I should pay for my food tonight, he was actually demanding money for the house you've been paying for all this time. I nodded once, slowly. Yes. The single word echoed in the quiet room. Brandon's eyes lifted to meet his grandparents'. For the first time that evening, he didn't look down. He didn't shrink. He simply held their gaze, letting them see the full impact of what their words had done to him. My father's shoulders sagged. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. No one spoke again. The silence that followed was no longer just heavy, it was personal, intimate, and entirely Brandon's. I drew a slow breath and faced my parents squarely. Starting right now, I said, the support I've provided will be reclassified as a formal loan with interest. I've had the agreement prepared by my attorney for some time. The document includes the full principal, a reasonable interest rate, and a clear repayment schedule. All that remains is your signature. My father's expression shifted from disbelief to something closer to panic. He leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table. Alyssa, we're old. How are we supposed to repay something like that at our age? My mother's tears came freely now. She pressed her fingers to her lips, shoulders heaving with quiet, broken sobs. I kept my gaze steady. I didn't prepare this document yesterday. I've had it ready for years. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I knew there might come a day when I had to protect my son and myself. I've carried this alone for far too long. I've allowed boundaries to erode without consequence. That stops tonight. I tapped the phone screen to bring up the email from my lawyer, a professional multi-page agreement titled simply Loan Agreement, Thompson to Jenkins. The terms were straightforward, the numbers unyielding. If you sign, the monthly payments continue as before. If you do not sign, I stop them immediately. No grace period, no further transfers. The lender will proceed according to the terms of the original mortgage. Lawrence's voice cracked. We're too old for this kind of debt. We can't handle it. Please, Alyssa. My mother's crying grew louder, her face buried in her hands. She rocked slightly in her chair, the sound of her grief filling the space between us. I answered without raising my voice. You have two realistic options. Sell the house, use the equity to repay what is owed to me, and move to something smaller that you can actually afford on your current income. Or keep the house and allow the outstanding loan to be settled from your estate when the time comes. Those are the paths available. There are no others. Brandon had been watching in silence, but now he rose from his chair. The movement was deliberate, not rushed. The chair legs scraped against the polished floor, a sharp sound that cut through my mother's sobs. He stood tall, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I'm not staying here anymore. I'm going home with Mom. Right now. I looked at him and gave a single nod. That was all the confirmation needed. We stood together. I collected my phone and purse with calm, unhurried movements. Brandon walked beside me, his steps firm, his eyes forward. We crossed the length of the private dining room. The long table remained untouched, half-eaten plates, cooling coffee, the birthday cake still under its glass dome. The soft classical music continued to play, indifferent to the moment that had just passed. The door to the hallway closed behind us with a gentle, final click. Outside the country club, the night air felt crisp and clean. We walked to the parking lot in silence, the weight of what had happened settling between us like a shared understanding. A few days passed in uneasy quiet after we left the country club. Then the calls started. My father dialed repeatedly, once in the morning, twice in the afternoon, 3 times before dinner. Each message carried the same urgent plea. Alyssa, we're family. We can figure this out together. Don't do this to us. I listened to every voicemail without responding. I let them build up on my phone like unanswered letters. On the 5th day, I forwarded the loan agreement and the detailed repayment schedule to both of their email addresses. The documents had been prepared by my attorney weeks earlier, professional, precise, and completely enforceable. The principal amount was listed clearly. The interest rate was modest but fixed. The repayment plan stretched over 10 years with monthly installments that would demand substantial changes to their current way of life. I included a brief cover note. Please sign and return the attached documents. If you choose not to sign, all future payments will cease immediately. They waited. I could picture the scene, the long discussions in their living room, the pacing back and forth, the whispered debates about what refusal would mean. They understood the risk. Without my continued support, the mortgage would go unpaid. The bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings again. The house they had lived in for decades would be at risk of being taken. After 4 more days of silence, the signed copies appeared in my inbox. Scanned pages with signatures that looked unsteady. No additional message. Just the executed documents returned as required. I confirmed receipt with 1 line: received and acknowledged. Support ends effective today. From that moment, I stopped every transfer. No more mortgage payments. No more contributions to property taxes. No more premiums for homeowners insurance. The financial lifeline I had extended for 6 years was severed completely. The fallout began almost immediately. Within a month, the house was placed on the market. A real estate sign appeared in the front yard, a quiet declaration that the chapter was ending. Open houses were scheduled. Strangers walked through the rooms that had hosted family dinners, birthdays, and holidays, unaware of the history embedded in the walls. The initial asking price was optimistic, but the market responded slowly. Reductions followed one after another until the price reflected urgency. They sold. The closing happened in less than 60 days. Equity from the sale was sufficient to cover the remaining balance of the loan I had formalized. My attorney managed the transfer of funds. I received full repayment deposited directly into my account. There was no ceremony, no final conversation. They relocated to a small apartment complex on the quieter side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, no private yard, no attached garage. The building was clean, but ordinary, nothing like the spacious home they had left behind. The country club membership was canceled first. The monthly fees were no longer affordable. Their names were removed from the roster. Friends they had golfed with for years noticed the absence. Invitations to weekend rounds and holiday events gradually stopped arriving. Travel became a memory. No more cruises through Alaskan waters. No more European tours. The photo albums and social media feeds that once documented exotic destinations went dormant. The new SUV was traded in for a basic sedan, reliable, economical, unremarkable. No luxury features. No leather interior. Just practical transportation. The most painful loss, however, was not material. Word traveled through the extended family network and old social circles. Conversations at reunions turned awkward. Relatives who once admired their lifestyle now spoke in hushed tones about what happened. The story had spread how the house had been quietly maintained by their daughter for years, how a single dinner had unraveled the arrangement, how refusal to acknowledge the help had led to the sale of the family home. The reputation they had cultivated over decades evaporated. No one referred to them as successful anymore. No one sought their advice on finances or retirement planning. The image of the accomplished couple with the beautiful house and comfortable life was gone. In its place was the reality of 2 older people who had misjudged their resources and lost the standing that came with them. I heard the updates indirectly from cousins who still spoke to mutual friends, from acquaintances who mentioned it in passing. I never asked for the details. They came anyway. Brandon and I settled into a new rhythm. He adapted to the house quickly. School continued without interruption. His dual enrollment classes kept him focused. He took a part-time job at the local bookstore, earning money for things he wanted instead of waiting for someone else to provide them. We rarely mentioned the grandparents. When the topic surfaced, it was brief and matter-of-fact. There were no dramatic scenes, no lingering resentment. Just the calm recognition that some relationships reach a point where continuation is no longer possible. I felt no regret. I had extended help for years without condition. I had waited for acknowledgement that never arrived. When the moment came to protect my son from further unfairness, I acted. The consequences were not my creation. They were the natural result of choices made over time. The house was sold. The lifestyle was dismantled. The social standing was diminished. And with them the pretense that family could endure on unacknowledged sacrifice alone. The silence became permanent. I blocked their numbers, removed them from my contacts, and filtered their emails into a folder I never opened. There were no final goodbyes, no last messages, no attempts to bridge the gap. The choice was deliberate and calm, to protect Brandon from the ongoing cycle of expectation and disappointment, and to allow both of us to breathe freely without the weight of unresolved tension. Brandon settled into our home immediately. His room was modest, but entirely his bed made with the quilt he chose, desk organized with school books, and his laptop's small shelf holding the books he loved most. He unpacked with quiet purpose, hanging clothes, arranging his things, claiming the space as his own, without hesitation. He returned to 10th grade seamlessly. The high school was close enough for an easy commute. His dual enrollment classes continued psychology and algebra at the community college, both earning him credits toward whatever future he would eventually choose. The schedule was demanding, but he approached it with a focus that had deepened noticeably. He also took a part-time job at the bookstore in town, 3 afternoons a week, sometimes 4 on busy weekends. He stocked shelves, recommended titles to customers, handled the register during quiet hours. The pay was modest, but every dollar was his. He opened a personal bank account, deposited each paycheck, tracked expenses in a simple app on his phone. When he wanted new headphones or a novel he had been waiting for, he bought them himself. No asking, no waiting, no guilt. The transformation in him unfolded steadily day by day. He began to speak up more often. When a teacher assigned extra work without explanation, he asked politely but firmly for clarification. When a coworker tried to shift responsibilities onto him unfairly, he addressed it directly and calmly. He no longer swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. He expressed what he thought, what he felt, what he needed. He learned to handle money with intention. He budgeted carefully, portioning earnings for savings, for school supplies, for small things that brought him joy. He understood the value of planning ahead, of distinguishing between needs and wants. He recognized the effort required to earn each dollar and the freedom that came from controlling it himself. Above all, he came to understand that love does not demand silent suffering. He learned that genuine care allows room for honesty, for boundaries, for saying no when something feels wrong. He realized that real family is not built on one person carrying the load for everyone else. It is built on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the courage to speak truth, even when it is difficult. I watched these changes appear in quiet moments. The way he negotiated extra shifts at work to cover a school trip he wanted to attend. The way he politely declined when friends asked to borrow money he had saved. The way he discussed his college plans with me, not as a child seeking approval, but as a young man sharing ideas and listening to mine. Through these actions, his growing self-reliance, his willingness to confront discomfort without fear, his calm confidence in managing his own resources, I saw the deeper lessons take hold. I saw that family connection does not entitle anyone to exploit another's time, energy, or finances. I saw that every individual must ultimately own their choices and their consequences. I saw that shielding a child from unfairness within the family is not disloyalty, it is one of the purest expressions of parental responsibility. And I saw that sometimes stepping away is the only way to allow growth for everyone involved. There was no bitterness in the distance I created. There was no wish for retribution. There was only the quiet resolve that some bonds, when stretched beyond fairness and respect, must be released. By creating space, I gave Brandon the opportunity to develop without the pressure of constant judgment. By creating space, I allowed my parents the chance, however painful, to face the results of their own decisions. And by creating space, I reclaimed the peace and clarity that had been absent for far too long. Brandon flourished in that freedom. He smiled more easily. He laughed more freely. His plans for the future grew larger, more detailed, more his own. He moved through life with a quiet assurance that came from knowing his value was not dependent on someone else's approval or forgiveness. I never once doubted the path we took. The silence that followed was not cold or empty, it was restorative. It was room for healing. It was space for new growth. It was evidence that love, when healthy, does not require endless endurance of unfairness. In the end, we both emerged stronger. Brandon learned to stand on his own. I learned that protecting him was worth any cost. And together we discovered that sometimes the most powerful act of love is knowing when to let go, not out of anger, but out of hope that everyone might one day live with greater honesty, greater respect, and greater understanding. That was the quiet gift of the distance we chose.